The restaurant had seen wealthy guests, but no one commanded attention like the billionaire who had recently become a regular. Every night he sat at the same corner table, reviewing contracts and making calls while the staff moved carefully around him. But among all the workers, there was one person he seemed to notice the most: the quiet waitress who never complained, no matter how heavy the workload. She carried trays from table to table, sometimes covering double shifts, sometimes staying long after closing to finish cleaning. Most nights, the billionaire would simply glance up and signal for another order, barely acknowledging how exhausted she looked. Viewers might think this is just another story about power and indifference, but what happened weeks later would completely change the meaning behind every one of those long nights. The young waitress had started working at the restaurant to help support her small family. She was known by the staff as the one who never said no. If someone called in sick, she covered their shift. If the kitchen fell behind, she helped carry extra plates. If the dining room overflowed with customers, she somehow kept smiling through the chaos. Night after night, the billionaire's table seemed to demand more attention than anyone else's. Extra drinks, special requests, last-minute meals, even as the kitchen prepared to close. Some coworkers whispered that he was deliberately pushing her too hard. Others thought he simply didn't notice how much he was asking of her. Yet the strange thing was that he always watched her carefully when she thought no one was looking. When she struggled to balance a tray, his eyes followed. When she paused for a moment to catch her breath near the service counter, he noticed. Still, he never said anything. Instead, the requests continued: late desserts, additional meetings at the table, business guests arriving right before closing time. For weeks, it seemed like the workload would never end. "You are a whore." The restaurant manager even warned her once. "You don't have to keep taking every extra task," he said quietly, but she simply smiled and tied her apron tighter. "It's all right," she replied. "Everyone's working hard." What no one realized was that she carried more responsibility than anyone suspected. After each shift, long after the lights dimmed, she would head home to help care for someone who depended on her strength. Meanwhile, the billionaire kept returning. Some nights he stayed until the last chair was stacked. Other nights he left quickly after watching the room from a distance. The staff couldn't understand why such a powerful man kept choosing the same small restaurant when the city offered countless luxury dining spots. And still, the waitress worked tirelessly, unaware that every late shift, every extra task, every quiet moment of exhaustion was being noticed far more closely than she believed. Then one evening everything changed. The restaurant closed earlier than usual after a long week. The staff said their goodbyes and headed home through the quiet street. The waitress walked the familiar path to her small house, expecting nothing more than a few hours of rest before the next day's work. But just before midnight, a knock echoed through the silence of the night. It wasn't loud, but it was unexpected enough to make her pause. Uncle. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in disbelief. Standing there under the dim porch light was the same billionaire, Dad, who had spent weeks filling her shifts with endless requests. His usual confident expression was gone, replaced with something far more serious. In his hands was a folder and a small package. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The question hanging in the air was simple but powerful. Why would a man like him appear at a waitress's door in the middle of the night? Inside the restaurant, people had believed he was simply demanding another powerful customer who never thought about the workers around him. But the truth behind his late-night visit would reveal something no one in that dining room had ever imagined. The billionaire stood quietly on the porch, looking at the small home in front of him. It was nothing like the towering buildings and penthouses he was used to. Yet the determination he had seen in the waitress over the past weeks had brought him here. As the door opened wider, the warm light from inside spilled onto the steps, and the moment felt heavier than any business meeting he had ever attended. For weeks he had watched her push through exhaustion without complaint, balancing responsibilities that would overwhelm most people. Tonight, he had finally decided that watching silently was no longer enough. The waitress looked confused, but she had seen powerful people before at the restaurant, but never standing outside her home. The billionaire cleared his throat, almost unsure how to begin. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, sounded unusually careful. Explained that he had come because he had learned something during those long evenings at the restaurant. At first, he had simply noticed her work ethic, but over time, he realized there was more behind her determination than just a job. He had seen how she stayed late without hesitation. He had noticed how she checked her phone between tables, always making sure someone at home was all right. Curious, he quietly asked the restaurant manager about her situation. What he discovered changed everything. The waitress wasn't just working hard to pay bills. She was supporting her younger sibling and keeping the household running while juggling exhausting shifts. Strength had impressed him in a way no business partner ever had. The folder in his hands contained something she never expected. Inside were documents related to a small community cafe project he had recently invested in. Inside were documents related to to a small. He explained that the place needed someone who understood real work, someone who knew how to treat customers and lead a team with patience. During all those nights at the restaurant, he had been observing whether she had the resilience and kindness needed to run it. Every extra request, every late table had been part of a quiet test, not to break her, but to understand her character. The waitress listened carefully, still unsure whether to believe what she was hearing. He handed her the folder and the small package. Inside the package was a key, not just to a building, but to an opportunity she had never imagined. A cafe would open in a few months, and he wanted her to manage it. Training, support, and ownership incentives were already written into the plan. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering trust in the dedication she had shown night after night. For the first time since arriving, the billionaire allowed a small smile to appear. In boardrooms, people respected him because of his wealth, but standing there on a quiet porch, he respected her for something far greater, her perseverance. Weeks of hard work she thought had gone unnoticed had actually been the reason he chose her. While many employees would have complained or given up, she continued working with quiet determination. The waitress looked down at the documents again, realizing that the long shift, the exhaustion, and the endless requests had led to this moment. What once felt like unfair pressure suddenly revealed a completely different purpose. The billionaire wasn't there to demand another task. He was there to change the direction of her future. As the night air settled around them, both of them understood that this moment would stay with them forever. The powerful businessman who had seemed distant and demanding had come to recognize the strength of someone the world often overlooked, and the waitress who thought she was simply surviving long shifts discovered that her dedication had opened a door far bigger than she ever expected. Sometimes the hardest weeks lead to the most unexpected opportunities, and sometimes the knock that changes your life arrives quietly. At midnight,